The US Air Force has a problem. They are short on almost 2,000 pilots. And it's been like that for over a decade, because they can't train new ones fast enough to close that gap. So they started doing something that only a few years ago would have sounded absurd. So today we're going to investigate the technology that might finally fix the problem that US Air Force has been stuck with for over 10 years. And I also dug into the data on this, and I was genuinely surprised what I found. But more on that later. Now let's go see the setup. And the way this works is that I can see everything inside the physical cockpit. So now I'm in an aircraft carrier and soon it will be my time to take off. Then let's pull up the landing gear. All of the instruments works just like in a real aircraft. This is the F-18. We can see our friendlies there in the radar. And the benefit of using mixed reality, where you can see everything through your own eyes, or in this case video cameras, is that you have realistic hand-eye coordination. You can operate everything just like you would in real aircraft. But if this is now the future, then how was the training done before? I'll show you. So this is called chair flying, and it's exactly what it sounds. You sit in a chair and you imagine the cockpit and the maneuvers that you would be doing by looking at the piece of paper. And this is what the trainees were doing before, because there aren't enough high fidelity, large, expensive dome simulators, and you can't fly with the real thing before you've learned the basics in a safe, controlled environment. So now, instead of being immersed in a virtual environment, I need to use my brain and imagine that cockpit, and then I would be doing the maneuvers in my head before I get into the real aircraft. But of course, not all of the previous training methods were this simple. There are levels to it. And the next level, when you get from your chair flights, you get a joystick, a HOTAS, and a simple screen. So this is already better than imagining everything. But still, you're limited to just one 2D screen in front of you. And after that, we can get even more advanced. Then we might have perhaps 3 screens. And once we get then past that, then we still have those large domes that require their own buildings. They cost tens of millions and several hundreds of thousands each year to just maintain. And that's why there are only a few of them in each base where they are training pilots. So not everybody gets to have that many hours in those more expensive domes. So that's why they needed to create this. Pilot Training Next. US Air Force study from 2018, where they first tested these immersive technologies. And they found that out of the 13 who completed the course, all of them completed in half the time to traditional undergraduate pilot training program. The authors also acknowledged that since the sample size was relatively small, only 13 participants, that none of the findings were actually statistically significant. But still, it was such a strong indication that there is something that clearly works with these technologies. So it needed to be studied further. Now there's few clear advantages when comparing to the traditional ways of training when using VR. So I can naturally turn my head around and I can see what's next to me, I can see what's behind, and I also have a better sense of distance because there is a correct depth perception when using VR, because you have two displays, one for each eye, and they're drawing different picture to each eye, just like in the real life both of your eyes see the world in a bit different way, which then helps you judge distance. And the biggest benefit of the traditional high fidelity simulators, which are the domes or even full flight simulators, when compared to VR, used to be that you have physical instruments. And now even that can be replaced to some extent when using mixed reality, and I can have that realistic hand-eye coordination and use all the instruments like I would in a full flight simulator. But still, this technology is not going to replace all of those traditional high fidelity simulators, but this can help take some of that training away from those very expensive simulators, and as we've seen, can actually give you better training outcomes when you get more reps and sets done on a simple simulator. In 2024, there was a follow-on study to the original Pilot Training Next program. Now the new way of training had been in use for 3 years, and the researchers looked at the results when comparing to the traditional ways of training. And the VR training in this case wasn't even that complex. It was just a headset and a joystick, everything fully virtual. And of course, many things changed in the training syllabus, but one thing that remained constant was the so-called dollar ride. That's the first time that the students get the chance to fly the real training aircraft by themselves. And that's when they attempt 40 different maneuvers, and they are graded based on how well they're executed. And this was the fair comparison point to the old ways of training and now when using VR. And some of the maneuvers tested were takeoff and landing, tight turns, so 360 while trying to keep the horizon level. I don't know how this would be graded. And then even something more dangerous like letting the plane stall and then needing to recover. And the results? Well, 40 different maneuvers were tested, and all of them improved when using the immersive technologies. And out of the 40, 33 were also statistically significant. And at the same time, there was a reduction in the more traditional higher fidelity training devices, such as the domes. So now the students spent half the time in those higher fidelity traditional simulators, and they were still able to outperform the previous ways of training. And this was a very risky bet at the time, because it was previously thought that what you train first tends to be the stickiest. So if you go first into VR, the assumption was that you learn the wrong ways of doing things. But this study showed quite the opposite. But of course, many things were changed at the same time, so this is not a controlled trial. But it is still a very strong data point that the VR training seems to be quite effective. And there is also now much more data than in the previous study, because now over 200,000 individual maneuvers were created. Now we can try a skill that would be very risky to train in real life, so landing on that aircraft carrier. Down the hook, landing gear, and then hope for the best, I guess. Let's hope that we hit the
deck. Right way. Full speed and catched.
Well, that may not be the way that you're actually taught to land on the real pilot training program, but the principles are the same. And only time will tell if devices such as this one will finally help US Air Force to fix their pilot shortage and get rid of the problem that they've had for over 10 years. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.